The hallway outside the operating room had that particular kind of silence I'd grown used to over the years. The kind that settles after a long surgery when the adrenaline finally drains out of your hands. I was leaning against the wall reading a text from my aunt about my grandmother's 80th birthday party when my phone buzzed again. This time it was my older brother. "Don't embarrass us this time. Just come, eat, and leave. Mom asked me to remind you." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Eat and leave, like I was a guest someone had been forced to invite. I locked my phone, pressed my back against the cool wall, and let myself feel it for exactly 5 seconds. Then I straightened my coat and walked back into the world that did know who I was. That was a Tuesday. The party was on Saturday. I'm 31 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life being the family disappointment. At least that's the version of me that lives in my parents' house in Cedar Falls, Iowa, the small town where I grew up between cornfields and a Methodist church that doubled as the social calendar for everyone within 10 miles. In their version, I left for college and never came back. I lost touch. I got too busy. I thought I was better than them. My mother once told me, in the gentlest voice possible, that maybe I'd be happier if I stopped chasing whatever it was I thought I was chasing. She was talking about my career. She didn't know what my career was. Not really. I'd tried in the early years to explain it. Surgical residency. Cardiothoracic fellowship. The fellowship at the Children's Hospital in Boston, where I spent 2 years learning how to put my hands inside the chests of babies whose hearts were the size of strawberries. But somewhere around year 4, I gave up trying to make them understand. Every explanation came back to me like a boomerang. "So you're still in school. When are you going to be a real doctor? Are you ever going to make actual money?" I don't know exactly when I decided to stop correcting them. Maybe it was the Christmas I missed because of an emergency repair on a 6-month-old's aortic valve. My father didn't speak to me for 3 months after that. And when he finally did, it was to tell me that my sister-in-law had cried on Christmas Eve because her presents weren't wrapped properly and I could have helped her if I cared. A 6-month-old in an ICU bed. Wrapping paper. I never figured out how to bridge that gap, so I stopped trying. I drove out from Chicago on Friday afternoon. 5 hours on I-80, watching the land flatten into the kind of horizon that always made my chest ache a little. I booked a room at the Hampton Inn off the highway because staying at my parents' house had become its own kind of ordeal. Last time I stayed there, my brother's wife told me at breakfast that she didn't appreciate how I made everyone feel small with my fancy life. I'd nodded and asked her to pass the syrup. The party was at the community center on Saturday afternoon. Folding tables, plastic tablecloths in cream and gold, a sheet cake from the grocery store with my grandmother's name spelled wrong in blue icing. Grandma Vivian. The cake said Rivian. Nobody noticed. I arrived 20 minutes after the official start time, which I had calculated carefully, late enough that I wouldn't be cornered into helping set up, early enough that I wouldn't make a scene by walking in during a speech. I'd worn a navy dress, simple, knee-length, the kind of thing I used to wear for grand rounds before I learned that nobody cares what surgeons wear under their scrubs. Small pearl earrings. My hair pulled back. Nothing about me said anything in particular, which was the point. My grandmother saw me first. She was sitting in a chair near the windows, a small woman with the kind of skin that folds like tissue paper now, and her eyes went soft the moment I walked through the door. She held out both hands without standing, and I crossed the room to her and kissed the top of her head. She smelled like the same lavender powder she'd worn my entire life. "There's my girl," she said quietly. "There's my Hollis. That's my name. Hollis. That's my name. Hollis." My grandmother is the only person in the family who has ever said it like it was a good thing. "Hi, Grandma." She squeezed my hand. "How long can you stay? Through tomorrow morning?" She nodded like that was enough. She'd stopped asking for more years ago, and I think that was its own kind of mercy. My mother spotted me from across the room a few minutes later. She was in the middle of a conversation with one of my aunts, and she didn't break away. She just lifted her hand in a small wave that was less greeting and more acknowledgement, the way you might wave at a delivery person. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the percolator on the side table and waited. My older brother found me first. His name is Bradford, but everyone calls him Brad. He's 36, runs my father's insurance agency now, lives 4 blocks from our parents in a house my father co-signed for. He has 3 kids and a wife named Ashley who teaches 2nd grade and considers herself the family expert on everything from holiday traditions to whether or not I should have children, which she has opinions about, despite never having asked me directly. "You made it," Brad said. He didn't hug me. He never hugs me. I made it. "Did you get my text?" "I got it." He nodded once, satisfied. Then he glanced over his shoulder at where my father was standing near the cake table. "Dad's in a mood today. Just try not to set him off." "Set him off how?" Brad shrugged. "You know how he gets when you start talking about Chicago." I hadn't said a single word about Chicago. I hadn't been in the room for 90 seconds. "I'll do my best," I said. My father didn't approach me at all for the first hour. I knew he'd seen me. He has the kind of peripheral vision that comes from 40 years of watching everyone in a room to gauge whether they're judging him. But he stayed near the cake, talking with my uncle, and he let his absence say what he wanted to say. I went and sat next to my grandmother, and we talked about her garden, and about the new minister at the church, and about how my cousin Beth was expecting her 2nd baby in October. My grandmother held my hand the whole time. She has tremors now, small ones that she doesn't seem to notice. The speeches started around 3 o'clock. My uncle went first, then my aunt, then Brad, who told a long, rambling story about my grandmother teaching him to fish when he was 7, that he has told at every family gathering for the past decade. People laughed in the right places. My grandmother smiled with the polite, glazed expression of someone who has heard the story enough times to lip-sync along. Then my father stood up. He didn't have notes. He never has notes. He's the kind of man who believes that real speeches come from the gut, which is a polite way of saying that he says whatever he feels and calls it honesty. He talked about my grandmother for a few minutes, sweetly enough, and I felt my shoulders relax. Then he pivoted. "You know," he said, looking out at the gathered cousins and neighbors and church friends. "Mom always said the most important thing in life was family. Being present, showing up." He paused. "She's 80 years old today, and she's surrounded by people who built their lives around her, around each other. That's what mattered to her, and that's what matters." His eyes found me across the room. And I want to say something because I think it needs to be said. There are folks here who put in the work, who showed up to every birthday, every Christmas, every funeral, who didn't disappear when life got hard. Those are the people Mom wanted here today. Those are the people who deserve a seat at this table. The room had gone very still. I felt my grandmother's hand tighten on mine, just slightly. "Hollis," he said, not unkindly, "just final, the way you'd address an unpaid bill. I love you, but I think you understand. This room is for the people who chose family, and I'd like you to let those people have their day." I want to be honest about what happened in my body in that moment. There wasn't shock. There wasn't even surprise. There was a small exhausted recognition, the kind you feel when you realize the dream you're having is the same dream you had last week. My father had been building toward this for years. I had known, somewhere underneath my ribs, that one day he would put it into actual words. And here we were, in front of 40 people with a sheet cake misspelled in the background, and my grandmother's hand trembling in mine. I stood up. I smoothed my dress. I leaned down and kissed my grandmother on the cheek and whispered that I loved her, and I started toward the door. That was when my grandmother said, "Wait." She didn't say it loudly. She said it the way she'd said everything my entire life, in a voice that you had to choose to hear. But the room heard her. I turned back. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at my father. "Sit down, Russell," she said. My father blinked. "Mom, I didn't mean to upset you. Sit down." He sat. He was 58 years old and he sat like he was 12. My grandmother let go of my hand and reached for her purse on the floor beside her chair. Her tremor made it slow. Nobody moved to help her. I think we all knew, somehow, that this was a thing she needed to do herself. She took out a folded piece of paper and a thin pair of reading glasses, and she put the glasses on. "I was going to wait until later," she said quietly, mostly to herself. Then she looked up. "But I think we'll do it now." I didn't sit back down. I stood near the door, my hand on the back of a folding chair. Not because I was planning to leave, but because I'd forgotten how to move. My grandmother unfolded the paper. "3 weeks ago," she said, "I had an appointment at the University of Iowa hospitals. My cardiologist there has been seeing me for about a year, ever since my heart started doing that thing in the spring." She glanced at my mother. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to fuss. You know how you get." My mother's mouth opened slightly. "He told me," my grandmother continued, "that my mitral valve has been getting worse and that I'd need surgery sometime in the next 6 months. He said it was a complicated case because of my age and because of the other things." She waved her hand vaguely at her own chest. "He gave me 3 names, 3 surgeons in the country he said he'd send his own mother to. 2 of them are in Cleveland. 1 of them is in Chicago." I felt the floor change underneath me. "He gave me a piece of paper," she said, holding it up so the light caught it, with the names on it. "And he said, 'Vivian, you're lucky. The one in Chicago is the best of the 3. She trained at Hopkins, then Boston Children's, and she's been doing this kind of repair for 9 years. And then he said her name." She looked at me. Her eyes, which I'd watched go cloudy over the past decade, were as clear as I'd ever seen them. "Hollis Marie Tennyson," she said, "my granddaughter." The room did not erupt. That's not what happened. What happened was a long, awful silence that started in my father's section of the room and rippled outward, the way water moves when something heavy is dropped into it. I watched my mother's face. She had gone the color of old paper. My brother Brad was staring at my grandmother with his mouth slightly open, and I could see, in real time, the moment he started doing the math. The years of dismissing me. The Christmas comments. The wrapping paper. My grandmother folded the paper back up. She put it on her lap. "I didn't tell any of you," she said, "because I wanted to see something." She looked at my father then, and her voice was the gentlest I'd ever heard it, which somehow made it worse. "I wanted to see how you'd treat her if you didn't know." My father had gone very still. "Russell," she said, "I have listened to you talk about my granddaughter for 10 years. I have listened to you call her selfish. I have listened to you tell people she abandoned her family. I have sat at this table and listened to your wife tell strangers that Hollis is too good for us. And I have not said one word. Mom, I'm not finished." He stopped. 3 months ago," she said, "I called Hollis. I didn't tell her what was wrong with me. I just asked her what she did because I realized I didn't actually know. Not in the way you know a thing. I knew she was a doctor. I didn't know what kind." She looked at me. "Do you remember that call, sweetheart?" I nodded. "I couldn't have spoken if someone had paid me to." "She told me," my grandmother said, "that she fixes children's hearts. That she fixes children's hearts. That she works at one of the biggest children's hospitals in the country. That she'd just finished a surgery that morning on a 4-month-old baby boy, and that the baby was going to be fine. And then she asked me how my roses were doing." She laughed a small, broken laugh. "My roses." She turned back to my father. "I went home that night, Russell, and I cried for 2 hours. Because I realized that the only person in this family who had bothered to ask my granddaughter what she did was an 80-year-old woman who waited until she needed a heart surgery to do it." My father's hands were folded on the table in front of him. He was looking down at them like they were someone else's hands. "I am not going to have this surgery yet," my grandmother said. I'm going to have it in the spring when the weather turns, and I'm going to have it in Chicago. With her. She nodded toward me. And I'm telling you this now in front of everyone, because I want you to think very carefully about what you just said. She looked at the doorway where I was still standing. Hollis, she said, come back and sit down, sweetheart, please. I walked back across the room. My legs felt strange. I sat down next to her, and she took my hand again, and she held it on her lap on top of the folded paper. For a long time, nobody spoke. The party didn't recover the way parties recover in movies, with a sudden burst of laughter and someone calling for more cake. People just sat there. A few of the younger cousins, who didn't fully understand what had happened, started whispering to each other. My aunt got up and went to the bathroom. Brad's wife, Ashley, stared at her plate like there was a script written on it. My father got up slowly. He didn't say anything. He walked toward the kitchen at the back of the community center, and the door swung shut behind him. My mother came over a few minutes later. She knelt next to my grandmother's chair, which surprised me, because my mother is not a kneeler. Mom, she said quietly, you should have told me. I shouldn't have had to. My mother looked at me then. She had tears in her eyes, but I couldn't read them. I have spent 31 years not being able to read my mother's tears. Hollis, she said. It's okay, I said, because that's what I always said. It's not okay. That was new. I hadn't heard her say that before. She reached for my hand, the one that wasn't holding my grandmother's. She held it for a long second. Then she got up and went after my father. The rest of the party went on around us in a quiet, broken way. People came up to me one by one. My Uncle Tom told me he'd had no idea, and that he was sorry. My cousin Beth, the pregnant one, told me her Obgyn was a woman she trusted with her life, and that she understood now what that kind of trust meant. An older man from the church, whose name I couldn't remember, told me he'd had a heart valve replaced 6 years ago, and that I should be proud of my work. He didn't say I should be proud of myself. He said proud of my work. I appreciated the distinction more than he could have known. I found my father about an hour later. He was sitting on the back loading dock of the community center on a concrete step with his tie loosened and his suit jacket folded next to him. He didn't look up when I came out, but he didn't tell me to go away. I sat down on the step next to him, not touching, leaving a space the size of a dinner plate between us. The parking lot was full of cars I recognized from 20 years of my childhood. I didn't know, he said after a long time. I know. You should have told me. I felt something rise up in my chest, the old hot thing that I had spent a decade learning how to swallow. And then, for the first time in a long time, I didn't swallow it. Dad, I said. I told you every Christmas for 6 years. You stopped asking. He didn't say anything. And even if I hadn't told you, I said, I shouldn't have had to. You should have been able to love me without knowing what I did for a living. He bent forward, his elbows on his knees. He didn't look at me. I thought you left us, he said. I thought you were better than us. I wasn't better. I was just busy, doing what I didn't understand, doing something hard. He nodded slowly. I could see in the late afternoon light that he was an old man. I hadn't noticed it before. Or maybe I had, and I'd refused to let it matter. Your mother and I, he said, and stopped. He tried again. We didn't know how to be proud of something we couldn't picture. Brad, the agency. We could picture that. We could see it. With you, we could never see what you were doing. And I think we made up reasons to be hurt by it instead of asking. It was the closest thing to an apology he had ever offered me. It was not enough. It was also more than I had expected to receive in my lifetime. I'm going to fix her heart, I said. Grandma's. I'm going to do it myself. He looked up at me then. His eyes were wet, and he didn't try to hide it. Can I be there? In the waiting room? Yes. Okay, he said. Okay, he said there for a while longer. A breeze moved through the parking lot and rattled a flag against a pole somewhere down the street. He cleared his throat. Hollis, yeah, I'm sorry. He didn't dress it up. He didn't qualify it. He just said it, and then he looked back down at his hands. Okay, I said. We didn't hug. I don't think we knew how to do that yet. But when I stood up to go back inside, he stood up too, and he picked up his jacket and he followed me through the back door of the community center, like a man who had decided, somewhere on that concrete step, to walk back into his own life on different terms. My grandmother had her surgery the following April. It went well. She was discharged on a Thursday and back in her garden by the end of May, slower than before but still herself. And when I called her in June, she told me her roses had come in beautifully and that she planted a new one named Hollis Marie that she'd ordered from a catalogue. I cried in the car for the entire drive to the hospital that morning. My father drove her to Chicago for the surgery. My mother came too. They stayed in a hotel near the hospital for 11 days, and on the morning of the operation, my father walked her into the pre-op bay and held her hand until I came in wearing my scrub cap and asked her if she was ready. She squeezed my hand and said, "I've been ready since the day you were born, sweetheart." And then she went under. When I came out 4 hours later to tell my parents she was fine, my father was sitting on the floor of the waiting room with his back against the wall, and he was crying in a way I had never seen him cry, not even when his own father died. My mother was sitting next to him, holding his hand. He stood up when he saw me, and this time he did hug me, and he held on for a long time, and he kept saying, "Thank you," in a voice that had nothing to do with surgery. I want to tell you something, if you stayed with me this far. The thing about being the family failure isn't the failure part. It's the version of you that gets built inside other people's heads while you're not looking, and how impossible it feels to ever break that version once it's been set. For 10 years I lived inside a story my family told about me, and I couldn't change the story because I wasn't the one telling it. And the truth is, I don't know if it would have changed if my grandmother hadn't done what she did. She gave them a way to see me that they couldn't argue with. That's not justice. It's just leverage. The justice would have been if they had loved me when they thought I was nothing. So here's what I want you to take with you. There is somebody in your life right now. Somebody quiet. Somebody you've decided is less than they are. And you have decided it because they don't make a noise about themselves. They don't post. They don't brag. They don't correct your version of them. Ask them what they're doing. Ask them what they care about. Ask them how their roses are. You don't need to wait for a hospital diagnosis to find out that the people you love are people you don't actually know. And if the story moved something in you, if it made you think of somebody you've underestimated or somebody you owe a phone call to, leave a comment and tell me about them. You don't have to use their name. Just tell me what you saw in them that you forgot to say out loud. Your words might be what makes somebody else pick up the phone. And if you'd like to stay with me for more stories like this, stories about family, dignity, and the long, slow work of being seen, please subscribe and stay a while. I have thought about that afternoon at the community center more times than I can count, and the thing I keep coming back to is this. The hurt didn't start at Grandma Vivian's party. The hurt started years before, in 100 small moments where I let silence do the work that words should have done. I told myself I was being patient. I told myself I was being humble. But somewhere along the way, my quietness stopped being a virtue and started being a wall. And the people on the other side of that wall built a version of me to match what they couldn't see. That's how it works. When you don't tell people who you are, they will write the story without you. And once that story is written, it becomes very hard to unwrite. My father, Russell, wasn't a cruel man. He was a frightened one. He couldn't picture what I did, so he made up a reason to be angry about it instead of asking. That's the cause. The effect was 10 years of distance that neither of us knew how to close. And my own part in it, the part I have to own, is that I let him stay scared. I could have explained, I could have insisted. I could have driven home in scrubs one Thanksgiving and let the picture do the talking. I didn't. I chose peace over truth. And peace without truth is just slow erosion. What my grandmother did that day wasn't magic. It was courage. She was 80 years old and she had a failing heart, and she decided, with whatever time she had left, to use her voice the way she should have used it years before. She didn't shame Russell to win. She shamed him to wake him. There's a difference, and I think it's the most important thing I learned. Strength isn't loud. Strength is choosing the harder honesty when the easier silence is right there. If you're sitting with somebody you've decided isn't worth your full attention, I want you to ask yourself why. Is it because of what they've actually done, or because of the story you've been telling about them? And if you're the one being underestimated, I want to gently say what I wish somebody had said to me years ago. You don't owe people your silence to keep them comfortable. Your work is real whether they see it or not, but you are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to take up the space your life has earned. The bravest thing I ever did wasn't a surgery. It was sitting on that concrete loading dock next to my father and finally saying the sentence I had swallowed for a decade. He should have been able to love me without knowing what I did. And once I said it out loud, something shifted in me that no scalpel ever did. Honesty doesn't fix everyone, but it does free the person who tells it.